Morning Mechanichicks. Today we are putting brake pads and rotors on this 91 Dodge Caravan. I think it's a Grand Caravan. Not that it really matters as far as the brakes go. This is a 15-inch wheel. You'll have to make sure to note whether yours is 15 or 14-inch before you go to the auto parts store. And the way that you can tell that is by taking a look here at the tire. This is a 15-inch tire. And it says so right here, 195/65 R15 if you can't read upside down. So that 15 is how far this is across, okay? So that's a 15-inch wheel. The 15 and the 14s are priced very differently. Here are some of the tools that we're going to need for today. I've got my air compressor hooked up. I've got my impact wrench with a 3/4 inch socket on it. I've got some brake clean, because we like to keep things nice and tidy. I'm using these two pieces of equipment, a screwdriver and a chisel for the prying that I have to do, one for the wheel and one for the caliper. Handy grease rag. Got a 10mm socket here on my 3/8 inch drive ratchet, and I've got a C-clamp to squeeze the caliper back together. I prefer to squeeze the caliper back as best I can, so I don't have to open up the system, because that's a pain to bleed the brakes. So I also have a handy jack over here, and I've got my new pads. And just to show you what's going on here, the other pads on the other side were not terribly bad. See, they had a little bit of thickness left on them. You can see that groove right there. You're in good shape. However, the ones on this one, see if I can zoom in for you to see it. You see how it looks kind of gravelly in there? That's because the brake pads have been eating away at the rotors, because they are completely worn down to the metal right here. Not good. So new pads should be nice and thick and look like this. That's a really good pad because it's brand new out of the box. Okay. We got a rotor sitting over there that we're getting ready to put on as well. For my jack, got my jack handle, which came off another jack, so it doesn't match up. That means that I have to use my handy dandy channel locks to tighten this up, and that way it'll stay when I pump it up. We're going to put it underneath the frame right here. Sorry for my finger. So don't let it go there, because this slides right inside of there if you're not careful. So we're going to move it back beyond that onto the frame and jack it up from there. The other side I jacked up, and I put this piece of wood this is sitting on top of it so that it wouldn't slide, but this side has a much softer ground, and so I'm going to make sure to put a piece of wood underneath it, and I can always go grab another scrap piece of lumber to put on top, just to give it a big enough surface area to grab onto that frame so it won't move around. So first thing we're going to do is take off all of these after we take some of the pressure off the wheel. Okay, we'll be back in just a second. Got the jack positioned correctly. We got it right here under the frame. It is missing the hole. It is staying where it belongs, which is a good thing. I cranked it up just a little bit, took some of the pressure off of the tire, but didn't make it completely come off the ground yet. Went ahead and loosened the lug nuts. Remember Lefty Loosey? Took those off. Not all the way off, because again, the tire still got pressure on it. So then I'm going to go ahead and finish jacking it all the way up, and then take all of the lugs off. And one of the things that you'll see me do is take the wheel and put it right here underneath the edge of the vehicle under the pinch weld, because if anything happens to that jack and I'm without jack stands, which I highly recommend having jack stands, they're underneath the vehicle behind me, then if it falls, it'll fall on the wheel. It won't fall all the way down, and you'll still be able to recover and pick the vehicle up. So we're going to take this off all the way, put it underneath here on the ground, and then we'll get started taking a look at those really bad brakes and rotors. Put the wheel off, and this is the rotor. See all this grittiness here? Old and busted. New hotness? Old and busted. Why does it look like sandpaper's been drug across it? Because this brake pad is completely obliterated. It's gone, and it's just been dragging metal against metal every single time you push the brakes. The other side is not that bad, but this side is. There's this thing called squealers. That's the colloquial name for them. This right here, when this gets down to where it's actually scrubbing on the rotor itself, it starts making that squealing noise. That's usually an indication that it is time to replace the brake pads because you don't have much pad left. Another way to check your brake pads and see how much pad you have left is to check your reservoir in your master cylinder. When you do that, when the level gets down close to the minimum, that usually means that the brake pads are worn out because this caliper right here, the piston, is pushed all the way out, and that means the most amount of fluid that there is in the lines is squeezing it. And so when we put new pads on, of course they're thick, that pushes the piston back over here, that pushes the fluid back up the line and back into the master cylinder and brings it back up to the full line. So just because your brake fluid is low or close to the minimum does not mean you need to add more. It means you need to check your brake pads. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and take off the bolts here. There's one here, that's the 3/8, and one right here. That's the 3/8 as well. And that's going to take this caliper off. We're going to be very careful about using this spot right here. Ooh, I see some caliper. Ooh, boot damage. Okay, that might explain a lot. We'll have to take a look at that. But we're going to use our pry bar too, right in here, grabbing a hold of the rotor itself and prying once we've got those bolts loose. And that's going to push the piston back in just a little bit and allow us to take this off really smoothly. And it's just going to fall off. Make sure you don't mess with your brake lines right here. You don't want to strain on them, so when you take it off, I'm going to set it up over here where it'll be out of the way and not pulling on the brake line. Alright? And when you're doing mechanic work, you notice that sometimes people do not replace the right bolts that came out of it. So this is one of the bolts that I told you was a 10 millimeter. It's actually, this one's a 13. The other side was a 10, but you have to use whatever size they actually are. This one looks like it's a little bit more stock to me, whereas the other one might have been aftermarket because it had such a small head. But it doesn't matter as long as the threads are the same length, they're the same pitch, and that the bolt is the same length and the diameter is the same size. The head size really doesn't matter that much unless you're trying to, you know, make sure that you have all your tools laid out ahead of time. So also add 13 millimeter to that and be flexible because you never know what you're going to get. So this one came out of right here, and then this one is right here. You don't have to remove them all the way. You can let them sit there because as soon as the threads come loose, they're absolutely fine to sit. And I don't know if I can do this with one hand, but I'm going to give it a try. Alright, so we're going to take our handy dandy pry bar here. We're going to put it here next to the rotor, and we're just going to gently pull. Focus, camera, focus. There we go. We're going to gently pull, and that's squeezing that caliper boot and piston right back inside of the caliper. Don't pull too hard because you'll slip, and you'll do like I did on my first day of school for 12th grade and bust your lip and go to school with a fat lip and have fat lip first day of school pictures. Not fun. Alright, so let's see if that loosened it up enough for us to remove. Sure it did. Alright, so we're just going to very gently, and look, I'm not all about straining at all. Okay, I'm like, let's work smarter, not harder. Okay. Ooh, buddy. That is not looking fabulous. Alright, I'm going to do, like I said, I'm going to set it over here so that we're not straining the hose. And I'm going to take these pretty little pads off if I can get them off without cutting myself to bits. There we go. So that's what it looks like before the pad is actually put on this metal bracket. And again, that is compared to a new one, which looks like this. See the difference? Big difference, huh? So, also notice this squealer has been broken off, and this one right here is still good. Since it's new, you know, kind of obvious. But that squealer breaking off means either one, somebody didn't listen to it and it eventually snapped, or two, it could have broken at any point, and which is unlikely but possible. Could have broken at any point and then not done its job. So we want to make sure that we notice that this bracket is the same size, same shape, everything's in the same place, and that we took it off this direction, so when we put it back on, we're going to put it on this direction. Okay? Oh, sorry about the focus issues. Alright, and then most of the time you'd have to take this bracket off that holds the caliper, and you can do that because of course everything's made to be taken off, but we don't need to, not on this vehicle, because it's very handy dandy, and we're just going to take our hand, and these are very heavy, so be careful, and remove them like so. Ta-da! Now you'll see the other pad laying here. I'll grab the new pad out of the box. This is that pad. See, this one's not in bad shape either. It's still got some good thickness on it. It's ready to be changed, but it wasn't detrimental yet. So we're going to make sure that this matches up like so, and it will. So we're going to lay that here exactly the way it needs to be. Of course, the pads have to squeeze the rotor, so as long as you've got the semicircle shape here that goes with the rotor shape, and you've got the pad on the inside to squeeze the rotor, then you can't put these on backwards. But some people will flip them sometimes. Of course, that has no sense. Or do them like this. This is much more common. Don't do that. This one doesn't have the squealer on this side, and it's not going to match up even though it will fit. So make sure that you're doing it this way. That's why I lay them out like this, so I know which one goes where. Now, let's put the new rotor on. This rotor, being a 15-inch rotor at Advance, was, let's see, close to $50. I think it was $44. The 14-inch rotors are closer to $34. So, big price difference there. Let's go ahead and take this off. All you gotta do, wiggle a little bit, and it should slide right out. Oop, oh man, took our hardware out too. Okay, so make sure our hardware goes back on. Get that slid back up there. That's going to take two hands. We're going to have to hold on for just a second. Alright, so to get that clip on there, all I had to do was pry these back out and push them right here. And that way it was able to clip on either side just fine. Alright, while I was doing that, I also took a look at some of our suspension parts. This is not looking good. Anytime that you see, don't mind the metal shavings, but anytime you see that a boot is ripped open, that's not good for the suspension parts. That means that the grease has escaped. Any grease that you put in here is going to escape, and that these parts are going to wear out really fast. The other problem is right here. So this is a bottom control arm, and this is a ball joint for the bottom control arm. And this is, as you can see, coated in grease up here that's dried, and this is very brittle here. The boot that goes around it, this is definitely going to have to be replaced. Also, the boot around the caliper right here was brittle, and it broke off in my hands, and so we don't like that either. See how that's crunching? Yeah, we don't like that either. So I went ahead, the rest of it fell off in my hands. I went ahead and cleaned it up with some brake clean, and if we had time, we would go ahead and replace this boot. We're definitely going to have to replace it by next time because there's a possibility of a leak, and nobody wants their brakes to fail, right? Okay, so definitely need some suspension work on this side of the vehicle. Taking a look at this back bushing on this control arm, it doesn't look terrible, and this one is a little cracked. It could be replaced, but it's not in super bad shape at this point either. But this front one definitely is. So that'll be next on the agenda. And at least now we know how to take most of this wheel off, so that the only thing we'd have to do is take off, let's see, this nut right here, and drop this control arm, lift this entire hub up, and separate the two, which would be very difficult, but easy sounding, difficult to do. Alright, so now that I've sprayed this off with some brake clean, I'm going to have to push the rotor, push the caliper piston back inside the caliper, and in order to do that, we use the old brake pad here that sat there, that would be this one, and we set it back in here the way it belonged, past tense. And then we're going to put our C-clamp here, and we're going to squeeze and squeeze and squeeze evenly until this goes all the way back and is flush with the edge of the caliper. Oh, there's our lighting now, finally. This is how you want to have the C-clamp positioned. You want this pretty much square in the middle of the brake pad. You want this side in a place that's nice and flat. And then you're just going to use the handle here, screw it up tight until it's flush. Okay, so now I've got the caliper pushed up flush. Again, there shouldn't be that white ring around there. That is because the piston itself is damaged, and honestly I would just probably replace this caliper pretty soon. But for the meantime, we're doing the absolute minimum, and that means that we're going to go ahead and replace what we've got as good a position as we can. So here's our new brake pad. This is the one that went on the back. We're going to slide it over here along the rails. Trying to do this through a camera angle is way more difficult than you'd think. There we go. I'm going to push this back. Make sure it's standing up nice and straight. There we go. Now we're going to put our brand new rotor on. This is 5 lugs, 5 stud, however you want to call it. I don't know if I can do this. Oh, notice right here on the side, oh, it does focus good, that you can see exactly how many. I'll turn it around for those of you that don't read upside down like I do. Okay, we've got 22.4 is the minimum thickness when these are turned. So if you have some sort of damage that's not that bad, not that bad, this bad, then you can focus. There we go. Then you can have these turned, and that means to just shave down the edges until they get to a specific thickness, and that thickness, the minimum, is 22.4. You need to make sure that both rotors are about the same thickness as well, so that your braking is even. That up, put it on there. Isn't that pretty? And then we're going to put the other brake pad on. Now remember, these are not held together by anything. They're just sitting on there. The caliper is actually what holds it. Alright, let's see if I can get some lighting on here. So our hardware is in place. Now we're going to snap it down so it holds everything like that. These little tiny wire lips. There we go, right here. Smash down. That's going to hold everything in place. And the rotor is going to wiggle a little, and that's okay. And then we'll put the caliper back on. Now, the bolt she'll need to push back out of the way, otherwise you won't be able to get it on there. And I'm absolutely certain that this is a two-handed job, because you have to get this little lip here, underneath here. And remember, these brake pads are way thick. Okay. And then you also have to slide this latch right down here onto that. Alright, so let me do that with both hands. Okay, so now we have the bolts tightened up. That was a pain to get in there. Now you see that cylinder right there? That's supposed to have that boot going over top of it. Focus. Nope. Focus again. Let's try again. There you go. Oh, that was so close. Okay, well that bolt right there has a nice little cylinder around it. There we go. And that little cylinder can pop out, and this little boot that goes around it will sometimes not cover it, and that's okay. You can probably use a, gosh, sorry about the focus, a screwdriver, and pop that back up. So anyway, got that one, and that one tightened. We did not stand on it or, you know, try to torque it down really hard, because don't need to. This needs to be really good and snug. So putting this on, you need to put the bottom side on first, sit it down like this, and then flap it over. Those little pistons on the inside were definitely the hardest part to take care of, because they wanted to come back out. Every time I tried to set it down, it would pop back out. So I'd have to squeeze them and then set it down and then rock it forward. Our hardware is in good shape. We've got these still down where they belong. Alright, you'll notice that the rotor still wiggles a little, and that's okay. We haven't pushed the brake pedal, so the piston is still completely inside of the caliper, and there's no pressure on it anywhere yet. So we're going to go ahead and put the wheel on, and then we're going to push the brake pedal to pump it to get the fluid back here first, and that'll prime those brakes so that we'll be able to use them. I want you to also notice how far the clearance is on this nice little squealer right here. So you've got that much room before the squealer lets you know, by the way, you need to change your brake pads. And I can almost put my entire finger in there. So lots of room there, lots of time for you to have noticed that these pads are wearing out and need to be changed. The suspension on this one is probably what's affecting the brake wear. That might be why it's wearing on one side and not the other, just because of the way the tire sits. So we're going to go ahead and take this wheel and tire and put it back on, and then we will tighten it up, set our jack down, and prime the brakes. Now again, I have a cute little way, I shouldn't say cute, that's not a very mechanic-y word. I have a less stressful way to put your tires on. I'll show you in just a second. I'm trying to put this wheel back on, and as you can see, my jack is almost vertical, and I really don't have a lot of more space, and this was not very far off the ground, maybe an inch, probably closer to half an inch. So it's going to be a little more difficult to get back on than if, you know, I was lifting it with my hands. I don't like to lift things with my hands though, because I'm not about straining, I'm about doing things the easy way. And so here is the easy way to put on a tire. Easier. And again, I'm going at this with one hand, so bear with me. First thing, the most basic thing you got to do is put the base in as far as it'll go of the wheel. Now, okay, this is cheating, I understand, because my studs are already lined up. But I will use, in general terms, a screwdriver, usually a very long one. Okay, if it's not perfectly lined up, oops, sorry for all the wiggles, to pry here under the tire to lift up. See how I lifted that one up? And that was too far. Ooh, look, I have a wiggly stud. That's not good. So normally I would just pick up here, move the tire with my left hand, put my left hand here, and I'd go left to right, whichever way I needed to. And then once they were lined up, I'd push back. Ta-da! And now it's on there. Again, this one was a little easy, even for me, but I never complain about it being too easy. So, job's never done until you have at least one lug on there. Those lug nuts are important, because if the jack were to fall now and that lug wasn't on there, that tire would come back and hit us. So now And it'd probably pop the tire too, with all the suspension parts falling on it. So once you've got at least one lug nut on, you're good. So you go ahead and start them all with your fingers. Again, it goes a lot faster if you're doing both hands. The other wheel that I took off didn't even have all 4 nuts. It was missing one, so I've got to go get one and put that on there because that's dangerous. If it's got 5 lugs, it needs 5 lug nuts. Alright. So since I have my handy dandy tool, I will be using my impact wrench. This stud being loose is kind of nerve-wracking. It shouldn't be. Let me pull it out. There we go. If I pull out and put some pressure on it, then it sits where it belongs. Alright, all of them finger tight. Oh, there we go. See how that slid back all the way on there? Now, that's the money right there. And some of these are just stiff and don't want to go on, and that's okay. We got something bigger that'll make them go on. Ooh, see that rounding right there? That's not very good. That might be why my socket got stuck just a little while ago. That rounding is never good for a bolt. Probably time to replace that lug nut as well. Come on, focus. Focus. There we go. Okay. So I'm just going to hit this with the handy dandy air wrench. Again, these are 3/4 inch. Not all of them are, just whichever one. I'm only pushing a 10-gallon tank, so 150 psi is the most I can get. I usually run about 125. I am not torquing these down so hard that you can't use them. I still have to be able to take this off on the side of the road somewhere, and I don't have any torque bars for my handy dandy wrench, so I just tighten these up a few times, hit them good with the wrench once they're snug, and let it be. Always do star pattern. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Never in a circle. That'll mess you up real bad. Okay, let me put these on and I'll come back in just a second. Well, I didn't record this part, but all you have to do at this point is slowly press the brake pedal several times until the pedal feels very firm under your foot. And then you're all done. Take the jack down and voila,